and welcome to a very special interview. And it is, before I introduce his book, let me introduce the man himself, Mr. Anindya Dutta. He has written so many books, and I don't need to introduce Boria Majumdar as such. Currently, we are here to discuss his book, Advantage India. First, when I read the name of the book, of course, reminded me of APJ Abdul Kalam's book, but it is different. It is about tennis. And it is about the history of tennis, and it is a fascinating read. I have been reading it almost whole night because, and of course, I was just showing it to him. I want to show it to the viewers also that this book actually will take time for you to read because you have to take down notes.
And don't make it sound so daunting.
But you know what? It's very interesting, and I would like to ask you some questions about your journey in this book. You know, only a few autobiographies of particular players have been written, but there's never really been an extensive research on tennis. How difficult was this whole research?
Actually, it was incredibly difficult, but it was very rewarding. And because, as you said, that there's no written record of Indian tennis. I mean, the All India Non-Tennis Association doesn't have any records. The South Club doesn't even have a library. There's very little written evidence, if you like. I started writing this just before COVID, so I had the advantage of the whole world going online. So I accessed the British newspaper archives, which go back 300 years, as you know. And when you rabbit hole into that, some fascinating things come through. And on top of that, I went and actually acquired some of the autobiographies that you were talking about, some which were out of print for many, many years, but there were copies around. And I pieced the story together. So it took about over 1 year of research before I started writing it.
Fascinating. And you have actually done research on, you have of course done research on cricket as well as Olympic sport, but I'm more interested in Olympic sport because that's uncommon. How difficult that research is? Because you, again, didn't have the advantage of COVID, if I have to say that.
And I've got a great story about it. In 2000, I was the first one who got a fellowship to go to the International Olympic Museum in Lausanne from India. And when I went there, by the way, it's the most scenic place in the world. At some point in time, you must go. It's on the borders of Lake Geneva, and the Beau Rivage Hotel is next door, and there is the sprawling IOC museum and archive. So I go there, this young Indian academic, this was 2004-5, and I went and said, whatever you have on India. And they said, okay, here you go. And they give me these extensive IOC executive committee minute books. After every 200 pages, some Indian is saying yes or no. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And I stayed there for about a month plus, got completely frustrated. What am I supposed to do? Called my wife in America, who at that point in time was at the University of Chicago doing her PhD, and I said, they're giving me a hell lot of money, come to Switzerland, let's travel. Because you can't just do anything. And we went on an extensive Swiss tour with that money. The day before I was about to leave for India, there was this practice at the museum that they would take scholars for a lunch. So over lunch, all of a sudden, there's one lady who literally said to me, so just to open, have you read the letters on India? I'm like, I've been here for more than a month. Every single day I would come here and say, do you have anything on India? And you're telling me letters, so I literally held her by the hand and I pulled her down. I said, to hell with lunch. Come down, let's go. And here she comes very casually and opens this kind of corridor, cupboard, whatever. And all these yellow files. I'm like, what are these? And she says, oh, there's some Tata letters back in the 1920s. And my trip got extended by a couple of months. I catalogued the entire Indian collection at the IOC. So if you go, it will be handwritten in those yellow files by me, IOC, etc., India. And there are about 500 plus Adorab Tata letters, which are now with me, some scans. And that started my research into the Indian Olympic movement. So it was absolutely unbelievable. And yes, no COVID, so it was all hard copies. So one would have to keep going back to Lausanne to try and do the research.
Wow, that's fascinating. The other part which actually is incredible about this book is generally if you ask any ardent tennis followers, they would think that Ramanand Krishnan was where Indian tennis started. But you have kind of, I wouldn't even say that you have taken the clock back, you have kind of disrupted the entire, concept, and you have taken it back to the first Davis Cup, our first team. So just talk to me about a few of these fascinating characters like Sidney Jacob or the Fyzee brothers.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The history of Indian tennis actually goes back much further than Ramanathan Krishnan, from what people think. In fact, it goes back to 1885, so 7 years after Wimbledon, and 7 years after the first Test match. So there's a lot of connectivity there, including the fact that it was the MCC which was involved in starting actually the first Wimbledon championships. But fast forward to the early 20th century. So 1885, it was actually the Punjab Lawn Tennis Championship, which was the first tournament played in India. And fast forward to the very fascinating characters that you were talking about. There's Mohammed Slim, there's Sidney Jacob, and there's the Fyzee brothers. Let's start with the Fyzee brothers, and something that we were discussing just before recording. A lot of the players from the past, they were multifaceted personalities in that they played multi-sports. None more than Hassan Ali Fyzee, actually one of the two brothers who, before Vijay and Anand, were the main doubles pair for India. Hassan Ali Fyzee was a part of the 1921 Davis Cup team, India's first Davis Cup team, which reached the semi-finals, and we can talk about that afterwards. 2 years later, he reached the quarterfinals of the All Indian Badminton Championships. And 2 years after that, he reached the quarterfinals of the World Table Tennis Championship. So, incredible. And then, there's someone like Mohammed Slim, who went up to world number 7. He became a barrister at the age of 18 and played tennis at a very, very high level. Bill Tilden called him the best baseline player in the world.
Wow.
So that is some compliment, right? So along with someone called Louis Dean, the Fyzee brothers, Sidney Jacob, and Mohammed Slim, they were all part of the 1921 Davis Cup, where India participated for the first time. India went to the semi-finals, beating France, who had the Four Musketeers, and were the world champions at that point in time in the quarterfinals. Incredible performance. And Mohammed Slim, then later went on to practice law. He was one of the judges of the Punjab conspiracy case. So the very deep connects to Indian freedom struggle, but none more so than Sidney Jacob. Absolutely fascinating. I mean, he's a character who fascinates me probably more than any other in the first half of the book. So Sidney Jacob was an ICS officer, born in India. On the day when Jallianwala Bagh massacre happened, Sidney Jacob was the agriculture secretary of the Punjab. He was in Amritsar. He was sent out into the villages to sort out some dispute. He came back and found that Jallianwala Bagh massacre had happened 1 hour after the event. In fact, when he was there was when Brigadier Roy called in to say that this has happened. He immediately sat down, insisted on a proper report being written, blaming Brigadier Roy for it. He carried that report to General Dunn and woke him up at 3 a.m. in the morning for him to acknowledge that report. On the basis of that report, when Brigadier Roy went back to the UK, he was denied all pension, and he never got anything from the British Civil Service or the army. And it's not great retribution, but that's the kind of part. He did his part, and there's not much more that he could have done. Sidney Jacob then, he was a very good tennis player, and he went on not only to play in that Davis Cup, he went on to become the first Indian singles player to reach the semi-finals of a Grand Slam at the Roland Garros in 1925, sorry. And then he reached the quarterfinals of Wimbledon a couple of times as well. So absolutely. And then finally, he was involved in writing the first census report of India. So it's just, the kind of characters that you find. And after I wrote the first edition of the book, Sidney Jacobs' grandson Philip reached out to me from Ireland and sent me some priceless photographs and cuttings from his personal albums. And those are all in the second edition of the book.
Absolutely. Boria, you have done, you have yourself done a lot of extensive work on tennis, on other sport as well. What are your first memories of tennis in India?
These are tremendous stories. I mean, as part of the journal that I edit, Sport in Society, I've published some stuff on the history of Indian tennis, and while doing the book on the Times of India, in fact, the 175th anniversary of the Times of India, I did read some of the early reportage on Indian tennis. But Anindya has gone into the real depths of it. So for me, a very special memory is when I did that show with Ramanathan Krishnan, Joydeep Mukherjee, Akhtar Ali, the entire gen. To have them in front, and I don't know if they'll come together again. I mean, obviously not, because one of them not there. So, but to have Ramanathan Krishnan, Ramesh Krishnan, Joydeep Mukherjee, Akhtar Ali, Zishan Ali, Mahesh Bhupati, all on the same stage was quite an incredible thing for me, because I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. So that show, thanks to Sharmin and Joydeep Da, was something I will not forget about the history of Indian tennis.
Absolutely. Anindya, we had a world number 3 in Ramanathan Krishnan. We had a world number 7 in Mohammad Salim in singles. And then we had an Amrit Raj and Ramesh in the top 20s in doubles. And we have had several in the top, but in the recent times, we aren't really seeing that. What do you think are the problems that ail this sport?
But I think Boria will agree with this, that tennis is a sport which is hugely finance intensive.
Absolutely.
Right? It's very difficult to create a tennis ecosystem unless you really have the administration behind it. I'll give you I'll throw a fact at you. 1596, a different form of tennis. 1596, Paris had 250 public courts, 7,000 professional players. 1596. Okay. How many public courts are there in Calcutta or Bombay or Delhi? Right.
True.
10 at most.
Really.
Right. We've not created a space for people to go and play without paying through their nose, and very few people have the ability to do that, which is why when you have Ramanathan Krishnan, you have a Vijay Amritaraj, you have a Sania Mirza, you have a Leander Paes, you have Mahesh Bhupati, every single person has been there at the top because of their parents or their family. Joydeep Mukherjee, Premjit Lal were lucky that Rajkumari Amrit Kaur created the Rajkumari Amrit Kaur coaching system, which the South Club, pioneered, and they benefited from that. Right, Dilip Bose taught them. But beyond that, that's why. I mean, today when you see players, how are players going to come up and compete at that level without financial support from either corporates or the association?
Boria, do you think that is the only reason that we still depend on individual talent?
Yeah, I mean, unless there is a structure, and we don't have a structure. And Sania will keep telling you, Leander will tell you, Mahesh will tell you. I mean, each of them have tried it in their own individual capacities, but then there are issues with the AITA, and all of us know that these players have had their run-ins with the AITA. There is no synergy. And in the absence of such thing, you will need one Imran Mirza to produce one Sania Mirza. You will need one Dr. Pace to produce and encourage one Leander. So Mahesh tried with the league and everything else. So that's the problem. And I don't see a next Leander Mahesh. I don't see a next Sania. That for me, and look, now you also have alternatives. You have a Gopi in badminton. Exactly. You have a X in table tennis. You have somebody else in some other sport. So where you will get money and monetary rewards, why would you want to play a cost-intensive sport? You won't.
2 months ago, I was discussing this with Vijay Amritaraj, right? And he pointed out something very interesting. He said, the BAT, the British Amritaraj, the Britannia Amritaraj Tennis Association, that did extremely well. And Britannia Industries was solidly behind it. Leander came out of it, Zishan, the whole bunch of players came out of that, right? what happened thereafter was the byproduct of that, or a consequence of that, was the creation of the MRF Pace Academy, which followed exactly the same pattern. In fact, it worked with Vijay to figure out what was going behind that ecosystem. And this is the fact that he pointed out to me, that look at what the MRF Pace Foundation has done for Indian cricket. And no one after Britannia, from a corporate standpoint, has come through to actually, set up something like that. And then he said another very interesting thing. He said the investment in a young tennis player is one of the most riskiest startup investments you can make.
Possibly. Absolutely right. Because
Percentage.
think about it. I mean, that cost-intensive structure, and that's a problem. It is a problem in a country like India. That's where you need government. I mean, provided the Sports Authority of India, the government of India, that's where you need serious backing, that even if you don't get a return, the government will say, fair enough, Khelo India, do it. These are challenging questions. I don't think Anindya, or for that matter any one of us, will have any answers. But what this book shows is, it's an eye-opener. That, boss, this is your history. This is your tradition. Now go do it. Otherwise, this sport, where is this sport 100 years down the line? Then you will say it stopped with Sanya. It stopped with X. That's my concern.
And one of the biggest points there, beyond the players coming up to a certain level, is that they need to be able to play competition at a certain level, right? And they don't have that level of competition within the country because not enough tournaments have been organized within the country. They do not have the money to go abroad and play that. So what is encouraging for me is, if you look at 22-23, the number of tournaments that the All India Lawn Tennis Association has actually organized in India has skyrocketed from what it was before.
So at least
it's a good
there's some
start. It is a good start.
Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.